Hello, welcome to Safe Space, where life questions are talked about from Christian perspectives. I'm Debbie, thanks for being here with me. Welcome to this episode where I speak to Dr. Hera Lukman about same-sex attraction. We will cover why this issue of sexual orientation is so perplexing and troubling sometimes, especially for the person struggling. How much do you think the field of psychology can inform us about our sexuality, and at which point does theology step in?
Right. I think psychology can tell us quite a bit on sexuality, although, there's still a lot of things that we don't know in the discipline of psychology. Psychology is a science, so, it's a science of human behavior, and I think the nature of science tells us about our natural world, what our natural world is like, what is there, what the function of the various elements in our natural world is. So psychology is a science, and it is a scientific study of behavior. So it tells us about what human nature is like. So definitely psychology can inform us about our sexuality. In terms of psychology, I think that's, to me as a Christian psychologist, I think psychology tells me or informs me about my human nature as a fallen being. And I do need theology to inform me about my moral aspect. So what is the right thing and the wrong thing to do, for example. So theology in my mind tells me who my God-intended nature should be. So in my opinion, we do need these two disciplines to tell us more about our holistic personhood.
Okay, just want to clear up some things. I think the average person on the road, they see a lot of terminologies like everywhere. Like you have sex, and then you have gender, and then you have sexual orientation and gender identity. So and I get mixed up all the time. I mean, as you would know. Maybe you can sort of enlighten us on what these different terms mean. I mean, last time, right, when I was a kid, you fill up forms and you're like, oh, sex, and I'm like M or F. And nowadays there's the term gender. So is it the same thing, or does it mean very different things?
Well, Debbie, I mean, you're not the only one who's, in a sense, confused about this terminology. I mean, I am confused, and the whole scientific community is confused. Really, we know very little about these terminology, and we try to define them, as best as we can. And if you look into the literature of sexuality in the scientific field, researchers are not on the same page, but we do have general guide, general boundaries, for example. So there is a consensus somewhat to some of these terms. I mean, for example, sex, is a term that we use to differentiate biological aspect of who we are. For example, what's the physiologically that is different between men and women, and for example, who has penis and who don't. That's how we classify male and females. Using the word sex that denote biological characteristics. Gender, though, is something that is, more psychosocial, more cultural differentiation between male and female. So it's something that is more malleable, if you like, depending on our culture, depending on, how our community would view the role, let's say, of a male or female, and this could actually be very different in different communities. So it's less subjected to biological, or it is more malleable in that sense.
And so, what about orientation, identity, and sexual identity, and gender identity?
That's right. Yeah.
Like, what are those things?
Again, as I said, earlier, people are trying to figure out what is the definition, let's say, of sexual orientation. For majority of us, we think that sexual orientation is about who we choose to sleep with or have sex with. In psychological studies, it's actually a bit more than that. So we differentiate sexual orientation from sexual attraction, for example. We say that sexual attraction is our emotional attachment and our sexual attraction to another. Whereby sexual orientation is more about this sustained attraction that we have for another, and some researchers, they are still defining or trying to define what sexual orientation is. But to let's simplify matter, sexual orientation does include our desire, sexual desire or sexual attraction. It includes our choice of our sexual preference.
Sure.
And also our sexual identity, who we label ourselves to be. So these three things are what I would include in our understanding of sexual orientation.
So is it like sexual orientation is something that I feel that I am, but sexual identity is something that I choose to be, possibly through a journey of coming out and choosing that for ourselves?
Yes, I think for me what helps is that every time I think about sexual attraction or sexual orientation, these two terms indicate less of a choice. So it's like more of an experience.
Right.
For example, I am very attracted to my husband sexually, emotionally, and that's something that I don't just choose, I experience.
Sure. Right.
And it's not so much subjected to choice.
Right.
How I label myself, for example, I'm a heterosexual, I label myself as a heterosexual, or I label myself as straight. That's a label that I give myself. I could say this in the open, but what is in the open, what publicly that people would say that they label themselves may be different from a private labeling.
True. It's
Yeah.
true.
So that is more subjected to choice, how we choose to label ourselves. So for example, it is quite common for individuals who use the word gay to mean very different things.
Right.
For example, someone who uses the word gay can say that, look, I'm gay, meaning I have same-sex attraction. Another person would use the word gay, I'm gay, to mean as an identity, as a label, that I identify with being gay.
Right.
Not just same-sex attracted.
Right.
So there's a lot of meaning behind words. And so it would help if we could be on the same page when we are using these terms. And many times we are not on the same page, so we have to clarify with whoever that we are having a dialogue with, clarify this terminology. Let's say, what you mean by sexual orientation? Do you mean by this or by that? Right. Then I think we can have a conversation that is less subjected to misunderstandings.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's good. Yep. So now, nature and nurture, right? We talked about just now. We distinguish between psychology and theology. One part is more towards more descriptive. The other one is more normative. And then now maybe we can talk about, because there's this. I'm not sure if it's a debate or the discussion is that, I'm sort of born gay versus I was raised in a family that made me, gay, and that's nurture. So what is your opinion, or what do you think is, are people sexuality by nature or nurture?
This is a very common question when it comes to understanding sexuality, especially sexual orientation. In fact, this is one of the top questions that people would ask. What causes sexual orientation? Is it nature or is it nurture? I just like to sort of say that, you know, we can't look at it as either or situation. Let me give you an example of, let's say we hear people playing a guitar, right? And we have a guitarist playing a wonderful music. And then we can't just ask, did the music come from the guitarist? How much does it come from the guitarist and how much does it come from the guitar?
Yeah, true.
We all know that the music comes as a result of an interaction between the person and the guitar. So you can't really look at the music in a separate faction. So this is where I think that we need to understand a little bit more of the psychological research that is that has been done in this area of sexual orientation and sexuality in general. So far, there is no evidence, there is no good evidence to suggest that sexual orientation is caused by either biological factors or by the environment. So people who say that I'm born gay or I'm born, you know, in a certain way, I don't think that you know, we have enough evidence to suggest that it's just a biological result or a biological factor that produces someone with same sex or opposite sex orientation. Neither can we say that, you know, a lot of people say, oh, you know, individuals who have same-sex attraction must have had a very difficult family background, adversity that happens, you know, during childhood or having parents that you know, not very good at parenting. I think we hear that a lot, but again, there is no good evidence to suggest that that is the case. So we must be mindful that sexuality, I mean, or sexual orientation, you know, specifically, and sexuality in general is a very complex issue, and there is no blanket or umbrella explanation as to why someone has a certain sexual orientation and others have a different one. You know, every one of us, you know, have our sexual orientation as a result of very unique interaction between biological and environmental factors. And so we cannot sort of explain what we observe in one person and use that explanation to explain another person's situation.
I think absolutely. I mean, it's complex, and sometimes we just want to come up with some hard and fast rules that it becomes formula. Like you said, the nurture aspect. I think perhaps many parents feel that pressure that if they don't act in a certain way or raise their kids in a certain way, then they come out differently. And really, it's so subjective, and it varies across. And I think it's helpful that you pointed out that it's neither one nor the other, and it's really a combination of factors and a combination of. It's hard to put a point or put a finger to it. And so, Dr. Hera, I think coming down to the final question for this clip, how much does sexual identity define meaning of life for the? I mean, why is it so important to go through this journey and to come out of it, you know, with some kind of sexual identity for people who are going through this? How much does it impact who they are or their understanding of themselves?
Yeah, I think it's a lot. Sexual identity, although it's not, you know, the only thing that we would examine to determine our identity, is a very fundamental aspect of who we are. And I think the question of who I am is, you know, one of the main existential questions that people ask, because it's a very, very important question that informs us of our purpose, our meaning, you know, and just gets us through life, you know, every day, because, you know, I'm fulfilling my purpose and I have a meaning in life and so on and so forth. So it's a very, very important question.
That's right.
To many of us, in fact, to most of us, we don't really wrestle with our sexual identity You know, we just let things happen because things just happen, you know. Nobody really, majority of us don't ask, you know, at puberty, how come I'm attracted to boys? Like, why am I attracted to my husband? You know, why is this attraction, you know, why am I attracted? I'm not supposed to be attracted to him, but I am, you know. And then you don't ask yourself, why am I heterosexual? You don't introduce yourself, hey, I am Hera, I'm a heterosexual. You don't do these things because it just happens as a process that is, you know, outside our awareness. We don't ask these questions normally. But if you were to imagine somebody who has an experience that is outside what he or she expects, let's say a young adolescent going through puberty, and when everybody around this boy is talking about all their, you know, advances to girls and how that girls just make, you know, their heart beat a lot faster and how attractive these girls are, and then he find himself not really interested in what the other peers who are boys are talking about girls, and he found himself being attracted to another boy. And when that experience sort of you know, when this boy realizes this experience is a very alarming experience, if you can imagine.
And it sort of creates a sense of exclusion as well.
Yes,
isn't it?
And it is, in a way, the boy would definitely ask, what's wrong with me? How come I'm attracted to another boy? How come I'm dreaming about him in a not so nice way at night, you know? And why does my heart, you know, start beating faster around this boy that I'm attracted to? It's very different from, let's say, admiration or respect. It's more than that. So I think that these feelings, majority of us don't go through. Therefore, we never ask how important sexual identity is to us. But to individuals who have a very different sexual orientation, they do ask this question, because these questions become a lived experience. They would ask questions like, why am I like this? You know, is something wrong with me? And particularly among Christian community, when this child is brought up in a Christian faith, they know that, you know, God created, you know, men and women, and that, you know, Sunday school is always, you know, having Adam and Eve, and, you know, so they grew up having understood what marriage is like, for example, you know, what attraction should look like. But suddenly they realize, why am I attracted to a boy? You know, I can't get rid of this feeling. I don't want this feeling. I can't get rid of it. And questions start coming in. Not just questions, but also researchers have done some research recently, looking at, you know, what are some of these experiences in individuals who grew up, you know, realizing that they have same-sex attraction. And what they found is that these individuals experience shame. You know, not just questions about sexual identity, but shame that results from this question. Because, you know, they think that something is wrong with themselves. So it's like a rejection of the self, and the fear that other people will reject them if they know that they're not the same as others. So that is a huge burden on someone who is wrestling with their sexual identity. This burden does have consequences, and we know that research has been telling us too that individuals who wrestle with sexual identity has poor mental health. You know, and so we do need to walk alongside these individuals to help them make sense of what they really want, and that is meaning. They want to have meaning from their experience. They also want community, for people to walk alongside them, for them not to feel as if they're alone in this journey, for someone to understand that it's not something that they ask for, but it's something that they experience and they continue to experience for a long time.
Yeah, Dr. Hera, you've just enlightened us so much about just how complex, what a complex journey it is to be finding oneself in that situation. I mean, it's easy for us from the outside because we've never had to wrestle with those things before. We've never had to feel as though we were different and excluded and unable to participate in other people's shared experiences. And that creates that kind of stress, trauma, shame, guilt that many people go through from the get-go. And these complexities, I mean, for us, outside of these experiences, to acknowledge and to see that, look, this is not our experience, should make us more open and wanting to know more. I mean, that should deter us from making quick judgments because really we have not experienced anything like that before, right?
Yes, I think it's very important for us to realize that we make a lot of assumptions, and many of our assumptions is made from our perspective. You know, and the questions about, you know, how we think individual who has same-sex attraction, what we think they're experiencing may not be what they're experiencing. And even if it is so for someone, it may not be so for another in a similar situation.
We can't generalize it.
Yes, and so we tend to assume, we tend to make generalization, you know, which put us in a you know, in a lot of difficult situation in terms of communicating, in terms of reaching out to another a lot of the time. Sure. You know, misunderstanding, miscommunications do happen when we make too much assumption and when we make, you know, too generalized assumptions as well.
Okay, thank you. So that's all for our second segment. To be the first to see our clips, subscribe to us by clicking on the subscribe button below. Share your thoughts with us by commenting below as well, or if you have a question for Dr. Hera, send it over to us at hosts@safespace.my. Come back next week where we will talk about the process of changing sexual orientations and sanctification. See you soon.